everyone to the Ovis Live event. I'm Chief Correspondent Tracy Grant, and if you haven't heard about Ovis before, Ovis is the future of news. Our mission is to end fake news by incentivizing the truth. And today's topic is really interesting. It's the importance of trustworthy, verifiable, and accountable local news. And joining us this morning is our guest, Emily Raguso. She is both the founder and the editor-in-chief of the Berkeley Scanner. Also joining me is Ovis founder, Linton Johnson. He's been a primetime TV news anchor for many years, including right here in the Bay Area. He also is a communications executive with a passion for trustworthy journalism, people, and planes.
Yes, planes.
Planes.
I love planes.
Well, welcome, Linton. That seems a lot out of the blue, but we can talk about that if you want.
Okay.
Okay, so before we get started, just a reminder to our audience, if you are watching us live, you can use the chat or comment section to ask Emily questions. Please also like and subscribe to our local channels. So let's get to it. Emily, tell us a bit about the Berkeley Scanner.
Thank you both to talk with you. The Berkeley Scanner is a local news website all about public safety, primarily focused on things that happen in Berkeley or affect Berkeley. Everything from sort of daily news and emergencies to deeper looks at how the system works. So it's sort of a very traditional background in my approach to it, but I try to cover everything that is really driving conversation and that people want to know about to know what's happening in their communities.
Well, what made you Scanner?
You kind of cut out, but I think you said what made me create it. Where did it come from? So before the Scanner, I had I went to journalism school and have basically been in the local news space for more than a decade. I launched and ran a news website in Albany and then worked at Berkeley side for 10 years, covering a number of different aspects of the Berkeley community, including public safety. And when I went to journalism school, I sort of had a goal of going into long form news or writing magazine stories, doing international reporting. But after I started getting my first jobs and sort of seeing what the industry was like, and especially when I was in Albany running Albany Patch, I actually got to see how important local news is for people to be engaged in their communities, to understand what the politicians are doing, and like on a daily basis, how much this information matters to people as far as how they act in how they experience their communities. And so that's why I just love local news, because it's just, there's no replacement for it.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Linton and I talk about this a lot, and when we have guests, we talk about it. What do you think about the difference between how you were taught to be a journalist and the ideals that you had, and how that applies to local journalism in America today? Things are different sometimes. I don't know. I'd love to know what you think.
I rely on the sort of traditional skills that I was taught, as far as, you go out, you do the interviews, you try to learn all sides of a story. And obviously our whole profession has been going through so many changes in the past 20 years. And with fewer resources at the local level, a lot of the more regional papers have had to cut back those local feet on the ground. And then as we've moved to kind of, I know we're sort of jumping ahead potentially, but as news has moved online, a lot of the editorial decisions sometimes seem to be, will this get clicks? Will this get traffic? And, that's what drives advertising. And so I think that has changed the way some coverage is done, because there may be really important stories that just aren't happening, because if they're not going to get the views, there may be some organizations that just won't cover them to the extent that they used to. It used to be the kind of meat and potatoes, we're putting it on the front page and you need to read it. But now that it's sort of up to people what they click on and look at, it's changed the whole recipe.
Yeah, absolutely. That now we're really getting into the nitty gritty. And before we go any further, I just want to remind people, if you are watching us live on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, please follow and like us. And you can ask a question using the comment section, the chat section. We'd love to have those stream in, and we will direct those questions to Emily. Once again, like and subscribe. So moving on, Emily, you just touched on this a little, but I'd love to know more about why you believe it's so important to have hyper-local news.
Yeah, I think it is critically important, as far as there's a lot that goes on at council meetings, or, in city government, at city hall, that when you don't have reporters in a community who are covering those things, people have a much harder time tracking those issues, deciding how they feel about them, and just sort of deciding who to vote for, making all kinds of civic decisions. And so I think there have been many studies done that just show that when there aren't local sites, that people just aren't engaged and they don't know how to make informed decisions. And I do want to kind of go back up a little bit and talk about the Berkeley Scanner, because I had been at Berkeley side for many years. It's a great publication that does really thorough, comprehensive stories about all kinds of things happening in the community. But I had sort of started my career writing about public safety, and I launched the scanner to just have a more comprehensive approach about what is happening in Berkeley and around the area, as far as crime, as far as disaster preparedness, as far as all kinds of things. There were just so many stories I wanted to do about the court processes, following serious cases through, that I knew that launching the scanner would give me a bigger platform to get into all those different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you make a good point. Like I worked at the Boston Globe for a time, and honestly, there are so many other communities surrounding Boston and other parts of New England that we just never touched. There's so much going on in these communities that having, the big paper or the major newspaper being the only one out there covering things means a lot of other communities and news gets lost. Don't you think?
I agree. And one of my internships, I did 2 newspaper internships when I was at the journalism school. One of them was in Indiana, and that was fascinating because it's not a part of the country that I was familiar with. And then the other one was in the Boston area. And there are just so many towns and places. Every place has their own unique structure and identity and governing board. It's like every few blocks, it seems like there's a different one. And so I think it is really critical to have people watching all those places. Otherwise, you end up with something like Bell, California, where there was just a lot of misconduct happening, but it was like no one was there to see it.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so here's what I am very interested in. What do you think of the ratings and clicks business model that appears to have in many ways decimated news?
I think it's really disappointing to see how there are a lot of places that are driven by that, but it gets back to this, when you're making financial decisions and you have you're selling ads and you're trying to make your business. I mean, it is important for news to be financially sustainable and viable. And so I think that's what has been really interesting to see in the past, especially 5 to 10 years, sort of how do you move from a purely advertising based model where you really need the page views to more sustainable ways of funding journalism through the nonprofit models, or through these other models, through membership programs, or events, and just having more more revenue streams, so it isn't all based on clicks. And I think that's one thing I always felt very lucky about when I worked at Berkeley side, was even though it was a website, the focus was on quality stories. And the conversation was never about, will this get traffic? I mean, you want to be doing stories that people care about and that will drive conversation. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But it's also, there are stories that may be more dry, but are just really critical information for people to have. And so I guess I'm just happy to see, I think our field is moving in a direction, many of the smaller sites and the local sites especially, where the question and the focus is what matters to people, and it isn't about those clicks. But certainly with some of the larger outlets, it does continue to be a problem.
Definitely. And I mean, you've been in this industry for a while. I'm sure you've noticed this as well. Like, I'll check in with friends, who I used to work with, who I haven't heard from in a long time on Facebook. And I'll say, oh, are you still working at that newspaper? And they'll say, oh my God, didn't you know that went under a long time ago? Now I work at this place. Like, it felt to me like they're definitely, over time, so many of these outlets, have just sort of disappeared.
I know we're always seeing those stories about, oh, there's this small town and there's one reporter left, kind of holding down the fort. But I do think as technology has changed, like one reason that I felt I could go out and launch the Berkeley Scanner on my own, and I'm a one-person operation essentially, although I do have many community tips and people helping me figure out what the important stories are in the community when they ask about things they're seeing or want to know more about. But the tools and technology that have come around to essentially allow people to launch their own sites, because the infrastructure is there. So you can have a good looking, visually appealing site that actually works really well on mobile, and, the fast page loading, but then you also have the membership piece of it kind of baked in, like with Substack. And so it gives people the tools, if they're passionate about covering a community, to actually do it. And when sort of backing up, when I worked at Patch, it was an AOL effort to sort of put local editors in many communities that had lost them. I mean, it was a really great idea. And I think it started in the New England area. And Patch sort of hired the editors, gave them the websites, but they handled advertising. They handled the financial side. And then over time, they came to realize, like, wow, this is actually really expensive to have all these reporters on the ground, and they sort of consolidated. And as they were doing that and sort of moving more towards this ratings and clicks thing and sort of not investing so much in the reporting, that's when I went to Berkeley side. But when I did and I left Albany, there was just a big outcry because people really valued the information that I was providing. And at the time, this was like 10, 11 years ago, and people were like, what could we do to keep you here? Like, how could we just pay you to sort of run a site for us? And at that time, there weren't really these sites in place where you could just go and do it on your own. But I think it's actually a big silver lining for where things are now, that if people are passionate, the tools are in place.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, the minute you said AOL, I immediately heard that noise in my head, the one when you
that noise. Yeah. Yeah, those were the days. That shows how old you are, Tracy. I'm just
excuse me? Wait. I was just 20 years old. My mom told me about that.
Oh, yeah, right.
Anyway, are you finding your subscription model successful?
It's going really well. I mean, I had the benefit of, I've been reporting here for a long time, and I have worked really hard. I mean, I really care about doing things the right way and like learning as much as I can about every issue that I cover. And so I had the benefit of, when I launched my own site, coming in with an audience or a following of people who have watched my work very closely for more than 10 years as I've been here. And so that gave me, I think, a good boost to start with. And so there's a monthly, people can pay monthly, or they could just opt to pay once for a whole year. People can sort of pay any amount that works for them, because I want people to feel invested, but I don't want anyone to feel that they can't afford it. And I should say, the site, there's no paywall. All of the news and all the stories, everything on there is available to everyone, because which was also the philosophy at Berkeley side. Everyone should be able to have access to this robust source of information. And I believe in that as well. But so when I launched the scanner, I kind of came in with this initial support of people who already knew my work. And then it's been the process since then of just raising the visibility and getting more and more people on board. And I've had really steady growth, and it's been exciting to see, especially because so much of my time is spent writing. I mean, I love writing, I love reporting, I love learning about all kinds of different things. And so I haven't gotten to spend as much time maybe doing outreach and just like marketing it. And so it's sort of, things are growing on the strength of the stories themselves and as word of mouth through the community. So yeah, I think it is really viable, especially in a place like Berkeley or the Bay Area, where we have, really educated population who's very engaged, who is passionate about their communities. But we see that in a lot of places, but I think particularly in the Bay Area. So it has been working out really well and been more successful, faster, more financially viable than I thought it would be. I thought it would take longer to kind of get to where I am now.
Well,
I have
I have
almost
some
1,000.
questions.
Oh, sure. And I
Go
was just
ahead.
going to say, I've gotten to almost 1,000 paying members,
Oh, wow.
which, and probably it's like an average of $70 a person. These are all just like community members many of whom have
Wow.
lived here for decades. And so it's very grassroots effort.
We do have a couple questions for you about how you run the Berkeley Scanner. So Kevin Kuhn says, what tools and tech do you use to run the Berkeley Scanner? And I don't know if you can reveal those sources, but if you want to talk about that.
Definitely, and I won't, nerd out too much, and thank you for the question, Kevin. Many news sites use a WordPress platform, and that's what I came from, but I wanted to go a different direction. It's a different publishing platform called Ghost, but I do equate it in some ways to Substack, because people are more familiar with that. But essentially, you pick your theme and maybe design it the way you wanted to, customize it a bit. But that's my platform. But then it also has the membership piece of it baked in. So people subscribe, and it's all just integrated in a really nice way. And then I'm also obviously on social media to the extent I can be, and using those tools. But yeah, the Ghost platform, it's an open source model, and so they really believe in sort of sustainability and putting the tools in people's hands. And I think it's focused on publishing, and so I think there'll probably be a lot more sites using it. That platform is about 10 years old, but it's still ramping up.
Good. We got another question about that. So now, as a solo reporter, do you miss having an editor? I mean, you are the editor in chief, but you're also the reporter in chief. What might be the pitfalls of not having someone like that to shape your reporting?
Yes, I think that's a great question, because editors are critical, and having another set of eyes is also really important, because we can have blind spots. And I've had a lot of autonomy and independence since going back to Albany Patch days. But prior to that, I had worked at the Modesto Bee in a traditional newsroom, and very much appreciated the review by people who had the institutional knowledge and knew the community and were great copy editors and all kinds of things. So that was the foundation of where I learned how to do this work. And I definitely valued at Berkeley side when I had a complex story, I could run it by the editors and then they would give me ideas. Okay, move this up to the top, or like maybe ask this question, like fill this in. And so most stories are straightforward enough that that isn't, you know, I feel very capable of just doing more straightforward stories without that. But when I have complex stories now, I often will run it by people I have come to know in my career. So I have a great sort of bench of people out there who are very willing to serve as resources for me when I need it.
Okay. Well, I think the biggest question here is, what do you do to ensure that your news is trustworthy, verifiable, and accountable to your subscribers? The community and the ethical standards of journalism and profession, the whole profession. I think this is what it's a big question, but this is exactly what Ovis is about. This is what we talk about all the time, is ensuring that the news is trustworthy, verifiable. I don't know why I'm having
verifiable.
Verifiable and accountable to your subscribers.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to be accountable to everyone, not just my members, although of course I do care about their views too. And I think I take a very traditional beat reporting approach to my job, which is it's like day in and day out. I'm in this community, I'm talking to people, I'm going to meetings, I'm talking to people in the neighborhoods, and just trying to inform myself as much as possible about all the different angles to a topic. And so when I'm doing the reporting, I'm starting out seeking all the information I can. And then when I write the stories, especially if a story is complex, I'll also go through a process of going over it verbally with sources before publication. And this is only, when something is very complex or there's a lot of sensitivity and nuance about it. But I find that really helpful to just make sure things are correct. And then even after the story is published, I would generally send the link out to everyone I talk to and say, hey, did I get anything? And this is how I've done my entire career. It's like, did I get it right? Do you see anything wrong? Let me know anything large or small that I did get wrong, because I want to fix it. And so it's sort of through that process of making sure every step of the way that things are right, and then fix it if they aren't, fix it in a transparent way. And so I think because that's the approach I've taken, I have developed a reputation for being thorough and being fair. And I take that very seriously. I mean, of the utmost seriousness. And I think one thing with going back to the ratings and clicks model we talked about, I mean, a lot of times those reporters are kind of parachuting in to where that next big story is. They don't know the community, but when you are in a community reporting on it day in and day out, if you're making mistakes, if you're sloppy, if you're making errors and don't care about fixing it, and you're burning people and you're not doing things with integrity, that you're not going to be able to keep reporting there, because that's not what people want to read or see. They want to understand what's happening, and they want to know that you're authoritative and that you will present them with the information they need to make their own decisions. And so I think that's those are some of the steps I take. And I know I mentioned it to you guys before, but one of my first journalism jobs in the Bay Area was an internship at Mother Jones, and it was fully focused on fact checking. And they really teach you how to go through every sentence, every word. Where did this come from? I'm going to call this person who was interviewed, make sure everything was right, but really taking that nuanced and detailed approach to, like, is this information correct and can you back it up? And especially, if you're using anonymous sources, but still you need the confirmation from multiple places, and making sure you understand what if people have a slant or an angle they're coming from. I mean, pretty much everybody does, but to be very aware of that and just make sure you're vetting things so that something is bulletproof.
Well, along those lines, I'm going to share my screen here. One of the things that you have said in the past, let me see if I can elevate this. Charles, you may need to help me with this. Okay, here we go. Is another thing, this is from the Evil-Eye, the local news site for Emeryville, and they did a feature piece on you. And what struck me is some of the comments that you made, which, you know, I as a journalist through and through really agree with. You said another thing that struck me was how many different viewpoints there are about the topics I cover. When you go to meetings and public events, you often hear just one segment of the population, but there are so many other viewpoints out there that people might be surprised to hear in Berkeley. I learned a lot about how much diversity there really is in the community and how nuanced people's thoughts are and complex and about complex subjects could be. So I think oftentimes we get an audience that shares just one viewpoint because maybe you tell a story that's that has, you know, it's kind of confirmation bias. How do you broaden their viewpoint by showing these other viewpoints? How do you find out about the different viewpoints and then share those viewpoints with the audience that may be you know, more tuned with maybe your unbiased or unconscious biases that you might have?
Yeah, I mean, that's the work of the reporting, and we go to the meetings and you hear people who really care about a topic and have devoted time and time to sort of getting out there and making their views heard. I mean, that's definitely nothing to belittle because it takes a lot of work to go to these meetings and learn about subjects and advocate for things in the community. That's very laudable, and people don't do that unless they really care. But then there are plenty of other people who just don't have time for that, or they have jobs or small children, or they need to go to bed early. They can't spend hours at a meeting. So I think, or they're running a business or whatever the case may be. But I think it's definitely our job to go out and just talk to as many people as we can and try to make sure all the views are represented. You know, sometimes that's research, it's reading about different reports that get done. And so I think those are some of the steps that we can take, but I think we are doing a disservice if we only report on the views of the people who can take time to show up somewhere. Yeah.
And then another thing that you had mentioned is we have so much power as journalists, and that power often goes unchecked. Readers can challenge us in the comments section, or people can send us emails if they feel we got something wrong. But our work is ultimately what's out there in print, driving the narrative to a large extent. There's very little oversight, and I think sometimes it gets abused. We aren't responsive enough to requests for corrections and clarifications. We don't try hard enough to include the relevant context. I think that does our work in our community a huge disservice. Why did you say that?
I think because part of it has been my frustration with, you know, as I was in Berkeley reporting on things, you know, most of the stories that you cover at a local site, if you work at a local organization, you may be the only one covering almost every story, but then every now and then there will be a regional story or something that draws attention from outside the boundaries, and you kind of get to see how other people frame things. And through that, I would often, you know, read someone else's account of a meeting I had been at or something and just been really perplexed by how they had interpreted events, or maybe they hadn't understood certain context, background, things that I've been covering very closely. And then it's an interesting process because I really do care about accuracy. So often, if I would see something in another news report that wasn't right, I would gently try to email the reporter and say, you know, hey, actually, this is what happened, or you sort of missed this, and just try to let people know. And a lot of times there's no response. A lot of times, you know, nothing gets changed. It's not necessarily even like, oh, thank you, but we stand by our reporting. It's just like no response at all. And so I think that is something, or I'm sure many people have had the experience where they've read a news story and then maybe wanted to give feedback, and you're looking around on the site, like, how do we reach them to communicate with the newsroom? I think it's something that, and it can often be really hard to find contact information for the reporter or an editor. So I think that's one. There's been a lot of discussion in the past 10, 15 years about the loss of trust in journalism. And I think this inability to contact people and just have those conversations is one thing that's driven it, because it just feels like you've got these people sitting in a tower where they're just reporting what they want to report, but there's actually no way to have a dialogue when they get something wrong. So I think those are some of the issues around that, and we need to engage with people. Like I will say I have a huge email backlog right now. I'm having a hard time keeping up with all the folks who have been contacting me and like wanting to engage, it is amazing, but I'm not keeping up. And that's one thing I want to do better on as time goes by. But I've always really felt it was important to sort of be a presence in the comment section. Do get back to people as much as you can. Do be open to that you might have gotten it wrong. Be willing to change it. Be willing to update it. Like, all those things are really key. And I think if we don't do that, we're not serving the communities the way that we should. That said, there's always going to be different views. And if you can take criticism, you can take input, you might not come to the same place at the end of it, but I think those conversations are really important.
Well, I was going to just jump in here real quick and kind of show people what we're trying to do here, if you don't mind me doing that, Tracy.
Sure.
We've been working for the last 5 years to establish a news site called Ovis. We've been in testing for the past, about a year and a half, and we're about to go live, hopefully in early summer. And it's a completely different approach to news, but with the same values that we all hold dear: as trustworthy, verifiable, and accountable news. And we use a technology called blockchain to validate information. And I know people get confused about blockchain, but this is what I'll say about it. If you use Facebook, you have no idea how Facebook works, but all you care about is being able to post pictures of your cats and kids online, right? It doesn't really matter how it works. I'm not going to show you how blockchain works. It's too complicated. It doesn't really matter, but I will tell you about the benefits of blockchain. The benefits are that it's a technology that is trustworthy, it's verifiable, it's accountable, and my favorite word, immutable, which means it's unchangeable. So when we record information on the blockchain, we know who said it. We can hold them accountable for it. Because it's verifiable, everybody can look at the information and see it. So it's completely transparent. And because it's immutable, meaning it's unchangeable, that information can't be altered. And if it is altered, we know exactly how it's altered. And these are all the values I think all of us journalists hold dear. And regardless of whether you're of your conscious bias or unconscious bias, it really helps restore public trust in journalism. So the way it works with us at Ovis is our central theme is Ovis it. If you have, what we're trying to do is give the power of storytelling back to the people. Right now, regardless, I think one of the things that Tracy and I and a lot of people found in journalism is just the mere selection of stories has a bias, whether conscious or unconscious. What you choose to tell and what you choose not to tell creates a biasness. And so what we decided to do at Ovis is give that storytelling, that story selection privilege back to the people. We literally, because of the blockchain, cannot control what the people want to see and hear. And so the way it works is you can click on Ovis it and you can submit a story idea. Now, this is our sample. This is our test site. So we like to say we're ending fake news by incentivizing the truth. But all these stories are fake because we're just in testing. But once you submit your story idea, you can see the stories that other people have submitted. And you can start upvoting these stories. So again, the people have the power to pick the stories that the journalists will write. You can vote on these stories and you can add tokens to it. So for example, here's a story, again, a test story. What happened to Deshaun Watson's accusers? It came with 3 votes and 230 tokens. So let's just say each token is worth $1. So a journalist who writes this story would be able to get most of that $230 that comes with the story. But when they write this story, they can't just publish it. It has to go through 3 independent certified fact checkers, and they're certified by the community. So we, the community, you, the community, are involved in the process of how we fact check. So everything is about community. A minimum of 2 of those fact checkers have to agree upon the facts of that story before it gets published. And then when it gets published, this pot of money gets distributed mostly to the journalists, some to the fact checkers, a little bit to the editor that's involved. But what's really interesting is that the person who pitched the story, they also get some of those tokens. So we're rewarding people for coming up with great story ideas. And then finally, the remaining pot of money goes to the entire community. So we're really trying to take the reward system and incentivize the one thing that we're all after, and that is the truth. Now, how do we hold journalists accountable to the truth? Well, because remember, we talked about the blockchain. When it's recorded on the blockchain, we know exactly who wrote the story, how they wrote the story, that type of thing. All the journalists on our platforms are also required to put down an surety bond. So they're putting their money where their mouth is, that when they write a story, it's trustworthy, it's verifiable, and it's accountable. And so goes for the editors as well as the fact checkers. So at any point, people can challenge, if they want, a journalist or a fact checker. And if we find that they purposely spread misinformation or fake news, we can hold them accountable, financially accountable to that. So the whole reward system is to really uplift great journalists, is to get those stories out there from the community that matter to the community. And really what is the most important part is getting all sides of an issue. And while this isn't built into this version of the platform yet, this is a later version, when someone pitches a story, other people can start asking different questions and suggesting different angles to the story. So the journalist can see all those viewpoints that Emily was talking about. And I know, Emily, you're a one-person shop, so it's really difficult for you to have to go out and read all those emails. But what we're trying to do is give you all those angles up front, and all our journalists up front, those angles, so that when you write the story, it has that complete picture. And then all the different story ideas that follow from the original story, that also comes from the community as well. So we're always we're incentivizing journalists to tell more and more and more of a story. One of the things that I like to kind of point out is that this is one of my favorite examples. You know, a bus crashes, there are 100 people on board, and 1 person dies. The traditional ratings and clicks media, you know what the story is: tragedy, 1 person dead on this bus, right? That's what the story is going to be. But there's an equal and factually accurate story that gives you a completely different viewpoint of that bus agency. And it's miracle, 99 people survived. There are multiple sides of the story, and the truth about that agency starts to come out. And I think one of the biggest problems in the news media that we see is that, especially the ratings and clicks news media, is that they only want to focus on the negative thing, and they don't want to talk about the other issues. In Ovis, our journalists have to talk about all sides, and we're incentivized to talk about all sides, and we want to get as many sides as possible. And then the last thing that I want to kind of say about this is we all have conscious and unconscious biases. You know, I'm a gay Black man in America. That's my bias. I see the world through that lens, and I recognize that. And so one of the things that we're trying to build in are the safeguards to ensure that despite my unconscious biases and my conscious biases, I'm always seeing other people's viewpoints. And so if I'm going to be a journalist on this platform, I have to write those other stories. And if not, somebody else is going to write those other stories that may be a little bit different than my unconscious and conscious biases. So we're trying to do our best to get all viewpoints explained on Ovis. So that's where we are. We're looking to launch hopefully this summer. We're going to be doing news in Hayward, which is really one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to Emily, is because she's successfully launched something in Berkeley by herself. And we think Hayward is a community that really lacks local news. There is no local news, and so we're starting here, and it's also where I live. But this is one of the reasons why we're starting Ovis, is because local journalism is important, but so is objectivity, so is telling all sides of the story, so is giving everybody a voice. And we're trying to build in those safeguards to incentivize that instead of the rating and clicks model, which kind of disincentivizes that type of stuff.
Well, so many questions, Linton. You want to get to them? Let's get started.
Okay. I know. So, the elephant in the room, Emily, is that you did get criticized by SF Gate recently in an editorial, which didn't ask you your side of the story. They wrote about it. And so there are a lot of questions, and it kind of set a narrative about you. And I wanted to ask some of these questions that people have about you, if you don't mind. So let's start with let's start with Raymond's questions. He asks, how do you feel about the fact that you're starting to be seen by a lot of people in the community as a right-leaning racist because you have clear imbalance?
Well, I would say that's not an accurate sort of take on things. There definitely has been criticism by some people on Twitter, and that's always the case. I mean, when there's controversial stories, there's always going to be strong views and reactions to them. I think one thing that has been missing from the conversation is that it's our job as journalists to ask questions, and to ask questions of people in power, and to get their views on the record, explain what they're doing. And just because we have an article that includes criticism of someone, it doesn't mean it's our criticism. One issue of several that I had with the SF Gate editorial was that it assigned not just me, but other journalists. It basically says, you're reporting this view that this person has. So, these reporters must hold these views. And that sort of started with the headline of the piece and was a theme all the way through it. But just because we report on things that other people say, it doesn't mean that those are our views, and it's our job to do that. So I know this wasn't exactly the question, but some people feel that my reporting on the DA's office has been one-sided. Not only have I repeatedly attempted to ask the office for comment, and will continue to do so, and really want to speak with the DA about her vision and her platform. When that hasn't been available, I've written substantial amounts about what her platform is, linking to her website, reporting on other interviews she's given, the directives that she's put out. I've spoken at length to her supporters. I've quoted them. If someone doesn't want to talk to you, then you do have to do the work to include the other perspectives. And I think that's one thing that's been missed by people who are calling my work one-sided. I've actually devoted quite a bit of time to bringing those other perspectives into the reporting.
Out of fairness, trying to make this as balanced as possible. This is Karen McGowan. She says, so grateful for the scanner, even in a so-called small Bay Area community. It's so difficult to find out what's happening in our own collective backyard. Another question we have from Ron Curtis. Hi, Emily. We would love it if you would do a story on the differences, compare and contrast between O'Malley's office and Price's office. A shootout with PD occurred at Assistant DA Wiley's home with Wiley's gun. You want to respond to any of that?
Well, I love the idea of comparing. I will say, and this is a question I've gotten, people don't understand, hey, why am I covering the DA's office now? It's not something I used to cover at Berkeley side. When I was at Berkeley side, I only covered the city of Berkeley. But when I started the scanner, we obviously had this historic DA's race that is newsworthy. It's a national topic of interest. People are really want to know what is our new progressive DA doing? It's a completely legitimate thing for all of us to want to know about. And so I didn't cover the DA's office before unless it was Berkeley cases moving through the justice system, because that wasn't my beat. So now it is my beat, and I want to cover it as robustly as possible. One thing I do want to do, and I don't know about that story that Ron suggested, but I mean, I don't know about the facts of that incident, but I do think it would be really interesting to look at, hey, what are the programs that O'Malley had sort of, what was O'Malley's approach to the justice system or reforming the justice system? What were her the programs as far as diversion? What was existing here? What can be done better? Because we all, I think, can agree there's major disparities, there's major systemic racism. Anyone who goes to a courtroom in Alameda County, it is really striking to see the racial disparities in the courtroom. And it is, you look around and you're like, there is a problem that our society really needs to address and do better. So I think one story I would like to do also is looking at progressive prosecution. What are the ideals there? How is it working in other cities? We have a progressive prosecutor just to the north in Contra Costa County. And I want to say on the record, I have no bias against progressive prosecution. I believe that we all need to address these systemic issues. But I think it would be really interesting to look at how different progressive prosecutors in other places around the US are doing it. How does that compare to what we're seeing? And just dig deeper into everything. I also want to say, when I started, like a lot of people, just because our communities have lost so much local news reporting and resources, a lot of people don't even know what that looks like anymore. And, you know, some people in the article the other day said, oh, I'm like obsessed with this issue or something. Like, no, when I write about a community, I am all in on it. And what I want to do is learn everything I can. When I started at Berkeley side, I remember it was like every day sort of calling the police, tell me this, tell me that, explain this, I want this interview. And they're just like, what is wrong with you? Nobody has ever asked us this many questions before. And it's just like, this is my approach. I want to understand it. And people might mistake that for some slant or bias, but it's like, I am passionate about learning everything I can about issues, and I hope to do that here too.
All right. Soul Cat says, can't thank you enough for your reporting, Emily. It's absolutely critical. There's another person who says there's an obvious difference in your reporting with African-American suspects. There are many examples. Are you trying to appease many of your subscribers as they are mostly definitely racist, which I think is a hard thing to prove, but that's the question.
I'm not sure about what differences they mean in my reporting. I mean, a lot of the stories I do, whether it's about, I mean, when I'm kind of choosing what crimes to write about in Berkeley, or it's like, what are the most serious incidents often? Or sometimes it's this local business had an issue happen on their doorstep and I'm going to write about it. But I look at the crimes that are affecting people and I write about them. No matter who's doing them, I will write about them equally. I also spend a lot of time talking with victims and their families, who unfortunately many of them also happen to be people of color. And I think those stories sometimes get lost. But I just spend a lot of time talking to as many people in the community I can from all different backgrounds. And so I guess I don't have a way otherwise to answer that question, because I'm not sure what it's specifically referring to.
Well, this is a question that I think this is just going to be a challenge for any news organization. So I'd like to see how you tackle this one. Why do you think, Rivka says, why do you think the scanner attracts almost exclusively commenters who are very anti-Pamela Price and want to recall her. Every progressive I know dislikes the scanner.
I'll say thank you, Rivka, for the question. And Rivka is one of those folks who really cares about the community and has spent a lot of time going out and advocating for issues she cares about. And I really do appreciate the work that she's done. I think as I kind of relayed earlier, one of the dynamics that's been happening is people who have said, I'm reporting criticism, so I must be biased. And it's like, if I'm not just sort of championing a viewpoint or championing the new DA or championing a perspective, then I must be trying to tear it down in some way, which just isn't the case at all. And I think as far as the comments on the scanner, it does attract a more centrist mentality. I think a lot of people who are concerned about public safety, and maybe in a more traditional way, because the focus of my site is public safety. And so the people who are commenting are sort of coming with that mindset. And I don't think, I guess I also want to say, I don't think that the only question that's come up regarding the new DA's office is an ideological one. People can have different viewpoints, but I think one question that some have had a problem with is just, it's been hard to be able to get access to the district attorney to ask her questions, whether that's on background for a story or whether it's at the courthouse when there's a big decision made. It's been difficult to just sort of say, hey, what's your view on this? Tell us what you think. And I think a lot of people have expressed concerns about the lack of accessibility. And I know there have been more interviews coming out, and she's been putting her own statements out. We're getting to know her, and I think that's really important. But I also think the more traditional, it's like, let's have some press conferences, let's have some sit downs, and like make that available to all reporters who are asking questions, not just ones who are that you're comfortable with or you're choosing. I think we all need to have those opportunities to get to know the DA and what her position is.
Another comment, the Berkeley Scanner has been a very welcome addition to local news. Everyone I have spoken to appreciates the scanner.
Could I jump in?
Yes, please, of course.
And I didn't mean to cut you off.
No worries.
But I will say, it reminded me of, Linton, what you were saying about seeking the input from the community to make these editorial choices. And one thing that is really central to my mission too is, like, what you're seeing, what you have questions about, let me know. I want to find out about it. Not everything will become a story, but still, if I can ask, get an answer for you about what it was, I will. And because we as journalists, not only do we have this privileged position where we can get through these channels often, and we, are often dogged and we will keep pushing, but we know who to call or know who to email to get answers. And we can use that to be more responsive to the community, even when it's not going to turn into a story. So I think I really liked what you were saying about you using that sort of community-driven approach as well.
Oh, good. Thank you. Another question, Emily, could you speak to the issue of quoting sources who prefer to remain anonymous?
I think that's a great question, and it's a really important question, because obviously if someone is going to put their name on their comments and remarks and perspective, that's the ideal situation. We all want that. We want people to go on the record and to stand up for sharing their experience and their story. I do think there's obviously a really long tradition in journalism for granting people anonymity, especially if they're raising questions about their workplace or raising questions about someone in power, because we know that those folks can be retaliated against. There can be retribution, there can be negative impacts. And so when we do use anonymous sources, it's really important to make sure, again, as I said earlier, that we understand what bias might someone be bringing and like what bone might they have to pick. And then we have to sort of go above and beyond to get verification through documents, through multiple sources. And so as I've granted people anonymity in the past. Let's say if I'm trying to get information about some police incident. Maybe the official statement is really sanitized and vague, but maybe someone else who is a police officer who is out there can give me more detailed information that's going to be more helpful to the community. I will include that, and I won't name them because they're not authorized to speak, but that is important information. But in a case like this that we're talking about with the DA's office, when it can be political. It is very political, but I just try to take every step I can in the reporting, after the reporting, to make sure things are confirmed by as many people in as many ways as possible. And sometimes that's the only way to find out what is really going on, or to get that perspective and reflect it accurately.
Let's see. We have another one here that says, "Hi, Emily. To what extent did you cover DA O'Malley and her obvious decisions, like, for example, her 2002 attempt to disqualify a judge from hearing a case?"
I think I really appreciate this question because it's something where I've seen what I don't think is accurate reporting. But as I said before, I was only covering Berkeley, aside from Berkeley cases that would go through a long court process. I would cover those serious cases, but I was not covering the DA's office from the perspective of sort of what is this office doing? How is it making decisions? I would look at individual cases and see their outcomes, but it wasn't a comprehensive piece, and it wasn't part of my job. It wasn't my beat. This is an entirely different situation. As I said, Pamela Price is a national story. I don't want to speak, little of our former district attorney, but it wasn't a national story in the same way. We were in a historic situation right now that I think we all need to pay attention to. To the specific question of, I had reported, recently, Pamela Price had sought to disqualify a judge from hearing all criminal cases in Alameda County. And I had said that this is the first time that has happened, that a judge has been challenged on these particular grounds. And so that's true. There was a challenge that O'Malley made last year. I didn't cover it, but I have talked to people about it, and my understanding was she was doing it in relation to one case. It was not the same situation. So I think folks are trying to equate something that are apples and oranges, but that's the thing. A lot of these stories, especially about the criminal justice system, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of details, and we all need to be careful to report them accurately. And nothing, I will say, although there has been some community criticism from folks who feel I have been not having a broad enough coverage, the district attorney's office has not come to me with any corrections or asked me to change anything. None of those conversations have happened. And I have, I still keep asking them to please talk with me. Let's have these conversations. But I think that's important to note.
Here's another question and statement. "Great to see the scanner prosper as a one-person operation doing high-quality nuts and bolts reporting. Any advice for other journalists to make this local news model work in their own communities?"
Thanks, Joe. I think it is just really cool and exciting right now how these tools have made it much easier. It's like if someone just makes the technology available, and then we can just basically go do the work of doing the reporting. And I think it does just make it much more accessible to people. So I think if you're passionate about local issues, and maybe you don't need to say, I'm going to go cover like this whole town. You could say, hey, I want to cover housing, or I want to cover unsheltered individuals and communities. Or just, I would say, pick something that you care about and then just go out and learn everything you can, and start writing. And I think these tools are really available, and it's an exciting time to be in local news.
Time for a couple more questions, then we're going to wrap up. Emily, can you confirm or deny that opposition political PR firms are approaching Bay Area reporters regarding DA Price's coverage?
I have not been approached, and I don't know who else has. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's not something that I've heard of or experienced.
Couple last ones here. This one from Mr. Y. Jenkins. There's an obvious difference in your reporting with African-American suspects. There are many examples. Are you trying to appease many of your subscribers as they are mostly, oh, we already did this question. My apologies.
That's okay.
Yeah, okay. Let's see here. Tracy, you have any questions? Want to find some more here? They're pouring in here, and I'm trying to be as fair as possible.
Sure. Could you tell us a little bit more about your model for the Berkeley Scanner? I mean, you know, how many stories are you publishing a day, or is it, you know, when you find something really interesting, then you actually will take time to focus on that and have more of an investigative approach, or is it more of a daily type of thing?
I think, yeah, going back to, I kind of go back to when I was a crime reporter in Modesto. When you're a beat reporter on anything, you're sort of constantly juggling, hey, there's maybe some smaller daily stories, there's some longer term things I'm working on. So it's always this juggling act of, which is one thing that makes it so much fun and like such a great job, because it's always something new, it's always something different. So my goal is sort of 5 to 15 stories a week. Sometimes it's one story a day, sometimes it's 3. It sort of just depends on how many of those big stories can I get done. But I try to have, you know, several very substantive stories each week, and then filled in by smaller things that are somewhat less time consuming. So it's a variety, it's a real variety and a mix. Even though, you know, public safety is one topic, it's still, there's just so many different angles to go in there. And yeah, I think that about sums it up.
Okay. Linton.
All right. Hi, Emily. Article mentions the DA's office and enhancements. Have you ever researched how enhancements affect Black and Brown communities, mass incarceration?
Yeah, the enhancements question is definitely something I've learned a lot about, and probably we all have, in the past few months, since the first big directive to come out of the DA's office was really largely focused on charging and enhancements. And enhancements were the kind of thing I would reference in reporting when you talk about charges. There are things that are added on to charges that can lead to a longer sentence, if they are found true. But it's such a jargony term. I think probably many people wouldn't have known what does this word even mean. But so we've all been talking more about that and reporting on it in recent months as this new directive has come out. And as the first story that I wrote about the directive sort of references big changes at the state level, and the state commission on reform and sentencing reform. And so when I wrote about the directive, I included a lot of material about what the state commission is doing, why enhancements, how enhancements are disproportionately used against people of color and the impacts of that. Now, I did inform myself about it, but these are things we can all learn more about and work to learn more about. And I think that's another thing I really want to emphasize is, you know, as I said, I really like to cover things from a granular way and cover things over time. And so one story comes out, that's not going to be the only story. Like there will be many stories, many times to like go into different angles and more depth. So I think that is an area that definitely we can all do more research on and learn about.
Well, I think we're a little bit over time here, and this is the comments keep coming in. It sounds like we probably need to do another show and have a more robust discussion. But I just want to personally say thank you, Emily, for coming on the show, talking about local news, giving us some ideas. I know when we launch, we're probably gonna face some of these criticisms ourselves. We're going to try to do our best to be as objective as possible. Like I said, the blockchain technology helps keep us accountable. And one of the great things about this is it doesn't matter what my viewpoints are. It doesn't matter what the viewpoints of any of our reporters are. What we're trying to do is create guardrails that prevent our viewpoints from driving a narrative that either consciously or unconsciously. And so I'm hoping that this works because we're trying to restore public trust in journalism. It's so super important. And despite my political viewpoints, I'm an independent voter. I look at issues. And for full transparency, I have voted for Pamela Price. But my ultimate goal here is I'm trying to see, from my biasness is that I want to see that we have a more just and fair criminal justice system. But at the same time, my core value is public trust in journalism. Beyond Pamela Price, beyond any one particular person, beyond any one particular issue. I started in journalism when I was 15 years old, and it's incredibly important for us to be telling stories from all points of view. And that is my driving force behind Ovis. And one of the things that I want to be very clear about is I can't control the news. All the power goes to the people. So when this launches, whatever my biases are, completely, I don't have any power to control the storytelling. The barriers are in place and the guardrails are in place to ensure that we get to trustworthy, verifiable, and accountable news. So, but Emily, you faced the fire. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me and for all the great questions. I really appreciate it. I think we all need to be accountable in that way.
Well, that does it for us today. I want to thank our special guest, Emily Raguso, for joining us. I also want to thank all of you for spending your Saturday with us in the chat here. Definitely spirited discussions going on. Thank you so much for coming to view this today. Please follow us on social by visiting our website at ovisnews.com. I'm Tracy Grant. Thanks for watching.